The SATA SSD market went pretty quiet over the last few years, thanks to the introduction of NVMe SSDs, including Samsung's own PCI Gen 3 and now Gen 4 drives, which, by the way, if you're interested in seeing a review of Samsung's 980 Pro, their blazing fast Gen 4 drive with a bit of a flaw, then feel free to take a look at that review. It'll be in the cards up above or on the end cards at the end. Now with that said, on the SATA SSD side, Samsung's 860 EVO is one of the best-selling drives on the market, full stop, and so you could understand why Samsung would like to see a slightly faster version on the market, slightly better, more refined, and so that's what they did. This is the 870 EVO and offers slightly faster read and write speeds, although it does have one slight flaw that I'd like to get into, and it's just not quite as good as I would hope. So let me explain why, let me run through some benchmarks and find out if it's actually worth buying or not. Of course, first, if you haven't already, consider subscribing for more videos like this one every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Now, I did actually end up having some issues during testing with my 500GB drive, so Samsung also sent over the 1TB one so that I could compare and test them out. Since the drives are slightly different, we will take a look at them both here. And to give you the headline figures, both drives will do 560 megabytes per second in reads and 530 megabytes per second in writes. That's a slight improvement over the last gen 860 EVO, actually matching the 860 Pro, and is very close to the theoretical maximum of the SATA ports that they're using, so that's pretty decent. Unfortunately, there is one feature that I would more consider a flaw than feature, but either way, it's called Intelligent Turbo Writes, and especially for the 500GB drive and the smaller 250GB drive, if you write what is a very small amount of data to them, the write performance drops from 530 down to more like 300. Intelligent Turbo Write is meant to be an amazing feature to significantly increase write speeds, but in reality, it is just SLC caching with a fancy marketing name and a way for Samsung to put big marketing numbers in the box without having to put the NAND flash in the drive that can actually hit that. With this design, if you write just 22GB of data to the 500GB drive, you drop from that 530 megabytes per second claimed down to more like 300 megabytes per second. Yes, that is faster than a mechanical hard drive and faster than some of the really cheap SATA SSDs, but it's not what Samsung claimed, and that feels a little, well, just not great. To give you an understanding of just why that happens, Intelligent Turbo Write is essentially SLC caching. If you don't know what that is, the drive's memory chips essentially can store 3 bits of data per cell, and writing to 3 bits in a single cell takes a little bit longer than writing to just 1 bit in each of those cells, or even writing to actually 1 bit per cell type memory. In this case, it is just standard 3-bit per cell memory across all of the chips, but Samsung can write to one of those bits per cell a lot faster than it can write to all 3, so it will do that for the first 22GB of data you copy, and then later on it can reorganize the data so that it can compress it back down again. We're pretty familiar to seeing this sort of caching in 4-bit or QLC NAND, because writing to QLC is incredibly slow by comparison to the 3 bits that we normally see in most drives these days, but you don't often see it in these 3-bit drives, and when you do, they tend to be fairly large amounts of the capacity of the drive, at least 10%, some I've seen more like 50%, so it can vary, but we don't see it all that often. Now, the thing is, having this sort of caching doesn't matter all that much, as long as the size of the cache is big enough. But, like I said, for the 500GB drive, you can copy just 22GB of data total, and by the way, that's 4GB of default space and then 18GB of smart intelligent space on top of each other. So if you write 22GB of data at full speed, say copy a game over from another SSD, then after 22 gigs, your write speed drops from 530 down to 300. And that's just not what Samsung advertise on the box. I mentioned that the 1TB drive is slightly different to the 500GB, and that's because even when it fills the Intelligent Turbo Write cache, it doesn't actually slow down thanks to the arrangement of chips that it has in this one compared to the 500GB drive, which means that it can carry on writing at full speed even when that SLC cache is full. Now, you've heard the theory, but what about all of that in practice? What about the benchmark results? Well, let's take a look at the 500GB drive first in the synthetic tests, and you can see that it can, in the right circumstances, hit the advertised figures of around 560 on read and 530 on write. It's actually slightly higher in Crystal Dismark. But in ATTO, which is normally a benchmark that matches the Crystal Dismark number fairly closely, it doesn't quite keep up. It's more like 510 megabytes per second on writes and around 530 to 540 on reads, which is still plenty fine, but isn't quite as good as they claim. Either way, it is very consistent across all of the block sizes, very close to running into the maximum that a SATA drive can do, and so while the drive is emptier, while the cache is empty, this is a pretty reasonable, pretty snappy drive. Take a look at the 1TB one, the results are almost identical except for a slightly higher 4K 64 thread result in EVO SSD, but otherwise is very consistent across the board too, and again around that 510 and 530, 540 on writes and reads in ATTO. I also like to run a file duplication stress test to stress the controller's ability to read and write simultaneously, and for I guess a bit of context, a good PCI Gen 3 SSD will run at around 1GB per second. One of the really good new Gen 4 SSDs will run at about 1.5, 1.6 gigabytes per second, but the maximum that I would expect a SATA SSD to get here would be somewhere between 250 and 300 megabytes per second instead, and that's pretty much what these got. The thing is with that turbo write cache, if you're not writing at full speed like this duplication test, it actually doesn't tend to fill the cache as quickly as it can flush it as it goes, and so the read speed or the write speed didn't drop across the 92 to 96 gigabytes of data that I was copying, and so that's okay. In summary, these drives aren't bad. If you end up with one, I'm sure that it will serve you well and will be plenty snappy for Windows or for loading up some games, but if you have the choice, well, I'd probably buy an 860 EVO instead while it's still in stock, or other options like WD's Blue SSD, which offer very similar performance without the caching pains. Samsung was the go-to for SSDs for literally years, but I guess I feel like they might be taking their lead for granted or just trying to maximize profits a little too much, and have essentially offered a drive that I feel isn't industry leading anymore. Like I said, it's not a bad drive, but there definitely could be some things that they could improve here for, you know, an 880 EVO or whatever else that I feel would make it a lot closer to being an easily recommendable drive rather than one with a few flaws, but I guess it's got Samsung's brand name and I'm sure plenty of people will buy it anyway. But yeah, I'd love to hear what you think in the comments down below. You've heard my thoughts. Let me hear yours. What do you think of the 870 EVO and its comparison to the 860 and that sort of stuff? Feel free to let me know in those comments down below. And if you do want to check out the 870 EVO or maybe just see pricing when we watch this, because it can and does vary, feel free to take a look at the top link in the description down below. That'll be an Amazon affiliate link that will take you to your local Amazon store. We can see all that good stuff. And there is a load of other links in the description you can check out too, from merch or hoodies or t-shirts like this one, or a load of other cool designs, Patreon for access to our Money Men Discord chat and sponsor-free videos, and a load of other options too, like affiliate links for people like Overclocks UK or VPN options, load of stuff. And there's going to be plenty of other videos on the end cards, including the 980 Pro if you want to see how that one stacks up too, and compared to the Sabrent Rocket 4 Plus. Otherwise, that's pretty much it from me. If you have any questions, feel free to leave those in the comments down below. Otherwise, we'll see you in the next video.